Try and plan your installation so that your starting wall is more noticeable than your finishing wall. For example, in this room, John is starting at the wall opposite the doorway. The finishing wall for this room includes the door frame and the closet. The finishing wall usually has a few more irregularities as you cut the laminate to fit the diminishing space, which in this case will mainly be hidden by the closet. Since you've already measured out the install, you should know what the width of your last row of planks will be on the finishing wall. If your calculations indicate a width of less than 2 inches, plan to trim the first row to compensate. Here John has already ensured that the starting wall is straight and has begun to lay out the first row. Note that he uses spacers that are 1/4 inch along the walls to allow for the expansion gap. The expansion gap is the room you leave to accommodate the natural expansion and contraction of the laminate as humidity and temperature conditions change. If you don't leave a gap, you risk buckling at the joints. Leave room for the expansion gap on all 4 walls and make sure it's never less than 1/4 inch. In general, the gap can be anywhere from 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. Lay down the first row with the tongue side of the laminate facing the wall. The tongue adds 1/8 inch to the expansion gap, but with 1/4 inch spacers, John is well within the 1/2 inch limit. Measure and mark out the dimensions for any vents along the wall onto the laminate. When you measure the end piece, don't forget to cut it a quarter of an inch less than what you measure to allow for the expansion gap. Cut the end piece and the plank you've marked for the vent. John cuts the end piece and plans to use the rest of the plank to start the second row so that the joints are staggered. He makes an extra cut in the leftover plank to keep the joints from one row to the next a minimum of 8 inches apart. To cut the hole for the vent, John uses the skill saw for the straight lines and the jigsaw for the corners. Fit the laminate for the first row back into place and make sure that the vent cover fits the opening now, as this is difficult to correct once the floor is down. Fitting the first 2 rows takes the most amount of time. After that, the installation goes fairly quickly. Here John begins to lay the second row using a tapping block to tighten the joints. Note that he keeps placing the spacers along the wall so the expansion gap is accounted for.